So we begin now with chapter 4 of Rambam's 8-chapter introduction to Pirkay Avot.
Right.
And in chapters 1, 2, and 3, the Rambam essentially laid out the anatomy of the soul, if you will, what the soul is made up of. And the last thing he left us with is what are the parts of the soul that we are capable of changing, and what are the parts of the soul that we cannot. And essentially, the digestive system and things of that nature that we aren't capable really of changing, those are left alone. And when those things go wrong, go to a doctor. If, however, but then there are parts of the soul we can change, and he identifies 2 of them, and one of them becomes the subject of this book. One is the moral character, the emotional, if you will, and then the other part is the rational, intellectual part of the soul that the Rambam argues one can change and develop. That, however, is something that is not for this book. That's something that the Rambam leaves elsewhere, primarily in Moreh Nevuchim and elsewhere, but this is mostly about the emotional element. And it took him 3 chapters to get to this point, first identifying different parts of the soul, and talking about how just like when it comes to the physical parts of the body, you have to go to a doctor. So likewise, when a person has a problem with their soul issues, he has to go to a soul doctor and work those out as well. He talked about the need to identify and be aware of when there are defects in one's soul, and not to fool oneself and delude oneself into thinking they're healthy. In the same way, of course, someone who is physically unwell and thought they were healthy that in and of itself is a very unhealthy part of living, or unhealthy way to live. And now in chapter 4, the Rambam identifies what he sees as the optimum version of man. Let's begin here. Hamaisim hatovim, good deeds, good behavior. Hamaisim hashavim, that is the equal behavior, equilibrium. Hamamutzayim, that is between 2 extremes. Seshteyan, both of these extremes, ra, are no good. Ha'achas, man, one extreme that's no good is tesefes, is overindulgence in whatever that thing happens to be. V'hashenis, in the other extreme, which is no good, is chisorin, is lack in that regard. V'hamailas, and the virtues, and tchunas ha'nafshes, are such moral characters, v'kinyanim, and the acquisition of such characters, mimutzayim, that are at the center, that are equal, that are not equal, that are halfway between the 2 negative extremes. Ha'achas man yiseda, one extreme negative being too much of that thing, v'acheres cheseda, and the other one being too little of that thing. And from these characters, there will be these various deeds. So, Mashal, by way of example, Hazir is being prudent. Is the middle ground between someone who's overly lustful, and someone who is lack of sensation and lack of desire at all. So the one extreme is someone who has lack of desire, has no drive to want to get up and enjoy anything in life. And in the other extreme, you have someone who is overly lustful and just runs after everything that he can possibly get his hands on. Neither of these things are good. And if Zahiro is being prudent, that's good behavior, and the character, which will bring from it this kind of prudence, this is the virtue of good character, of moral character. As someone who is down the middle, not overly indulgent, and not overly unsensitive to not wanting anything at all. But someone who is overly lustful and chases anything he can possibly get his hands on, anything to pleasure the senses. Who is the one extreme, that's negative. And the lack of feeling anything, lagamri, completely, to the point that the person is not driven to get anything, to want anything, to enjoy anything. Who is the other extreme. And both of these extremes are absolutely negative. These 2 characters, which would lead one to be overly lustful, and this is the overly indulgent type character, the one extreme. The heder argasha, and then the one who lacks any sensation, lack any desire at all. And this is the one who lacks from what he should be having. both of these are equally no good and bad behavior, too extreme or too little. So here we use the example of prudence being down the line, zehirut being prudent, being down the line, the middle, the equilibrium between the one extreme overindulgence and the other extreme, someone who lacks all physical desire for sensation and pleasure at all. I'm going to do one more paragraph here where he identifies a number of other central middle down the line characters that are between two extremes. And then I'm going to make a comment in comparing this to Chassidus. So v'chein as well, hanadivus, someone who is generous, is memutza, is in between ben akilus, someone who is overly stingy, v'apizir, and one who is overly frivolous, just constantly giving or extravagant. V'hagvura's true strength is memutzas, is in between ben amesir l'sakonas, one who is too prone to danger, someone who is reckless, or ben nachal levov, and one who is soft of heart and is too scared to take any risk at all. So the one who is strong is one who is able to take risk, but not so much that he is constantly chasing the thrill of recklessness. Vasilsul, and silsul is kind of like being dignified. That's how they translate it here. But silsul is like to carry yourself well. I guess it's dignity. Is memutza between hisnasos, being overly haughty, uben nevela, and being, nevela literally means like being disgusting, but it means to be like, to not care about myself to the point that my appearance is unsavory or unsightly. So there's one who is overly worked up about how he looks, one negative extreme. Other extreme is one who does not care at all about how his appearance is. And the middle ground is someone who walks with dignity. Likewise, anava, humility, mumutzas, is in between, ben agaiva, between ego, arrogance, the shiflus haruach, and one who is literally lowly of spirit, but one who is self-effacing. So arrogance, one extreme, no good. Self-effacement or complete self-effacement, other extreme, also no good. The middle is humility. The stapkus, being content with what one has. Memutza is in between avas amamen, someone who overly loves money, constantly running to acquire more and more. And the other extreme, which is negative, is atzla, someone who's lazy. Being content means someone goes to work, knows what he needs, and acquires it. You know, this little statement reminds me of a person I met in Yerushalayim when I was in yeshiva in Yerushalayim at Mayanot. So right across the street there was a little falafel shop that was a dingy basement, but the man made delicious falafel and it was very, very cheap. So we used to go there quite often. And there's an older gentleman. He was there living before the establishment of the state. He's been living there for a long time. And one day I come there in the afternoon and his shop is closed. It's not like it's late at night, it's in the afternoon. The next morning I see him and I ask him, what happened? Why'd you close your store yesterday? So he told me that he calculated how much he needs to live. How much does he need for his apartment? How much he needs for his food, for whatever he needs to live. And every morning he buys the exact amount of pitas necessary to sell to pay for what he needs in his life. And as soon as he's sold out of them, he closes his shop. It's such a innocent, pure, beautiful sentiment. You know, he knows how much he needs to live. He needs to sell more falafels. So he's going to go home and he goes to learn. He goes to study. And it was such a beautiful, beautiful thing. So this is, I don't know if this is the exact what the Rambam was talking about, but This is a person who's content. He's not lazy, but he's not chasing the dollar. He knows what he needs. He has a simple life. And he knows exactly how much he needs to sell to cover his living. His name was Rachma. And I went back to Jerusalem a few years later, and the store wasn't there anymore, but I don't know where he is. It taught me a big lesson.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's the content. Being content is the middle ground between overly chasing money and being completely lazy. The toivlev, being good of heart, memutza is in between, bein hanevela, again that same word, someone who is, literally nevela means disgusting or repulsive, someone who doesn't do anybody favors. The yisrin tevel levov, and someone who does too much favors for people. In Hebrew, they call it a friar, someone who's being used by others. Now, it's interesting that, the Shemona Perokim is originally, written in Arabic, And for whatever reason, the words in Arabic for this line failed the Rambam. So he put in parentheses some explanation, which gives us a nice insight into what he means by these extremes. Now it says, because to these characters, there isn't shem yadua b'lashenenu, a proper word for it in our language. I have to explain what they are, and what the philosophers are hoping to tell you when talking about these character traits. So Leiv Tov, someone who has a good heart, Kodim is referred to Misha Kol Kavanasa Lehetiv Lebnei Adam B'Gufay, as someone whose entire intent is to help other people, whether it's B'Gufay with his own body, or with his money, Batzasai through his counsel, B'Chol Yecholte to the best of his ability, B'Li Shiasiguhu Nezek, but so long as it does not cause him personal damage, or personal disgrace, and this is the proper way. I want to help people, but not to the point that it's going to that I'm going to be used and abused. That's the center line. That's down the line. That's the good-hearted person. Hanevel, this disgraceful person, who is the opposite. This is someone who does not want to help other people, even if it causes him no loss, no stress, no damage. He still won't help. This is the other extreme, which is no good. The negative, the downside extreme. The Yisem Tev Love, Tev Halevov, the upside extreme of someone being overly good, who Sha'isad Varim Haniskarim, Belev Tev, he does all those things mentioned above with a good heart, helping other people, but he does so, Vafilu Misayu Bezad Neza Godlo, he does it to the point that even if he's going to take great damage, he's going to be abused, a bizayon or great disgrace, a tarach or over exertion, or have or great loss. This is the first extreme. So the one extreme, you have somebody who's giving so much to the point that it causes him damage, to the point that he is abused by others, used and abused. And then the lower extreme is someone who doesn't help anybody ever, even if it's not going to cost him anything. And then the middle, down the line, proper character that the Rambam is hoping we achieve is someone who gives, happy to give, always ready to give, but not to the point that it's going to cause him any personal damage or disgrace, and not to the point that he's going to be abused. Now, likewise, hasavlonus, being patient, is memutza, is between kas, anger, the heder agashas chepa boys, and someone who doesn't sense that anything's wrong at all. Being patient doesn't mean that I don't feel like there's something wrong. Patient means I sympathize with whatever is happening, even though I understand that it's not so great. And therefore I'm patiently waiting for it to be over. That's the middle ground, the proper path. Whereas the extremes are angry, getting angry, and the other extreme is someone who doesn't sense it at all. Likewise, boishes poinim, someone who is literally bashful face, someone who is humble, humility, sense of bashfulness, is memutza. This is between bina azus, someone who is overly bold, babaishonus, and someone who is so bashful that it's self-effacing. Now says the Rambam in the parentheses, Pirush, this means, it seems to me, from the words of our sages, that there's two terms that the sages use to describe someone who is bashful. One is baishon, and one is boish panim. And the Rambam says that this language is precise, and baishon is someone who is too far with too much humility, too much bashfulness, and boish panim is one who has proper bashfulness. And as he says, shabaishon atzlam, the term baishon refers to, in the words of our sages, refers to a misha yesh le'rod boish, is someone who has too much bashfulness. Uboish panim, and someone who is a boish panim, which also means bashful, but not as extreme as the baishon, who mamutza, this is the center, the equilibrium, the proper way of having the right amount of bashfulness, not to the point of over self-effacement. Now, where does he get this from? He says we pick this up from Ma'amarim, from the fact that our sages say, Loiha baishon lamed, that baishon cannot learn. Meaning to say, at times, when it's required to learn something, one cannot take into consideration at all his pride. And therefore, in the case of learning, be a baishon, be overly bashful than ordinarily, to the point that you're willing to accept a mistake or accept that you don't know something and learn something new. But v'lo amru ein boish panim. They didn't use the term boish panim, which is the middle way. But then they said, amru, they said, boish panim l'gan eden. Someone who has the proper amount of bashfulness, not overly bashfulness, that's the one who goes to Gan Eden. That's the one who goes to paradise. But they didn't say the one who is overly bashful goes to Gan Eden. And this is why I organized this as such, to say that the Baishon is too far, too much bashfulness, with the exception of someone who needs to learn. Whereas ordinarily it's boish panim, one should be bashful but not too much. The same thing is true of all other characters. We don't have to actually identify them. They are self-understood. And when you're looking at any character, there are the two extremes, too much of it, too little of it, and down the middle is what we're looking for. Now, at this point, if we were just to leave it here at the Rambam, it would seem that the Rambam is advocating for no extreme emotions ever. It's always a question of finding that perfect balance. It almost, seems like the optimum person that the Rambam is referring to is someone who is almost static. We're going to see in the next passages how to fix if someone was too extreme in either too little of something or too much of something, then they have to, like an elastic, stretch to the other end so that they can get to the middle. But the ultimate, eventually, according to the Rambam, is to have this middle, static, not too much, not too little character in every area of life. Whereas in Chassidic life, we certainly hear of this idea of passion. There's the virtues of passion. People are praised for their outburst of emotion, a dance, a song, spontaneously. There's just a little interesting history. After the first Chabad Rebbe passed away, there was a breakaway movement. The Alter Rebbe is a bit of an enigma. If you were to read his books only, you might think he is an extreme rationalist, cold, hard intellect, and uncompromisingly so. But the reality is, in his personal life, he was very full of passion. And we know this, we can see this from the songs he left behind, evocative, emotional, soulful songs that he's left behind. There's stories about his prayer to the point that he would end up rolling on the floor from his over connection and dveikos, his over passion would just spill over to the point that he would physically be rolling on the floor. So when he passed, he was succeeded by his son, but his son had a friend, a chavruta, Aaron Strasheller, who broke away. And Aaron Strasheller took with him the passion, the great fervent prayer with lots of movement and enthusiasm and drama even. And the second Chabad Rebbe, the one who succeeded the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, or Dov Ber, the Alter Rebbe's son, he went with the rationalist side, the intellectual pursuit of godliness. Now, the truth is that this is only the way it is on the surface. When we dig a little deeper, we see that even the one who succeeded the Alter Rebbe, his son, the Rabbi Dov Ber, who took the rationalist position, actually was also full of passion and emotion. And in fact, the first publication he made as Rebbe is a little pamphlet called Kuntris HaIspilus, which means the booklet of enthusiasm, of excitement. And there he lays out his view of what his father intended to do in his books with the intellectualism. And there he explains that the whole point of the intellectualism is not for in and of itself the intellectualism. The point of the pursuit of the knowledge of God and all of its intellectual subtleties is not in and of itself, but the point is to generate emotion. But the problem becomes when a person feels that the objective is to generate emotions, then they put emphasis on the emotion as a standalone item, and then it runs wild to the point that it could be false emotion. And therefore, the Mitrab is basically positing that the reason why he's choosing the intellectual path is not because he wants the intellectualism to be abstract and separate from the emotion. He's choosing the intellectual path because that's the way he feels true emotion is to be garnered. True emotion is to be garnered by having a full appreciation intellectually of the truth of the divine, making it so real to me in my mind through dot, through connectivity, to the point that I feel for it. And in fact, this is how the Mitrab lived. He also prayed with lots of passion, but he did so with mighty control because he didn't want any passion to come out in a drama that could be seen as a posturing. So this emotion was extremely contained within his mind and within his heart, to the point that during his prayer to contain his passion, he would pound his fist on the table and sometimes his knuckles would bleed. So it's all to say that even when we think of the intellectual pursuits of Chabad as a study in of itself, it's, studying the esoteric levels of the divine and with great intellectual subtlety and novelty, it's not in and of itself to be there. It's meant to bring passion. It's meant to bring excitement. There are even times when the Alter Rebbe suggests to, on the other extreme, like we're talking about, this is passion for love of Hashem and fear of Hashem. There are even times when the Alter Rebbe suggests a person might need to take the extreme of self-effacement. In chapters 29 and 30, I believe, 29 and 30, the Alter Rebbe discusses someone who lacks all sensation. He's not feeling anything. He doesn't feel like he can get motivated. And a method the Alter Rebbe uses there is that a person should get to the point where he realizes things are not okay, and to really go through an exercise of telling oneself all of one's faults to the point that it bothers me that I'm not okay. And then he can go to the other extreme of being joyous because God's giving him the opportunity to redeem himself. I'm sharing this because it demonstrates that within the Chassidic life, there is room for extremes. Sometimes extreme self-effacement when it's required, and sometimes it goes to extreme joy. If the ultimate person that we're reading from the Rambam here is someone who is static and in this equilibrium of perfect balance between the two extremes, the Chassid who's striving to live up to the ideas of Tanya and the ideas of Chassidus in general is not someone who's equilibrium, flat line throughout his life. He's someone who's going up and down, and sometimes he feels more, sometimes he feels less, sometimes he needs that emotion, sometimes it's this emotion. And that's all part of the human experience, and his Dveikus Hashem is to sometimes feel this kind of love, and sometimes the fear, and sometimes self-effacement. It's all part of his journey. His feelings in Rosh Hashanah are one kind of feeling, and in Yom Kippur it's a different kind of feeling, and Simchas Torah it's a whole different kind of feeling. And it's constantly moving and moving and moving. Whereas in the Rambam, it would seem like there's this flatline equilibrium, and that's the ultimate person. So at the surface, it would seem like they're at odds. But as I suggested in one of the earlier classes, that it would seem to me that the Rambam is speaking of the human condition. The human condition. What's the ultimate place the animal soul should be? The human soul. And when the Alter Rebbe talks about passions, it's all about the godly. Or to put it a different way, if the passions of Chabad Chassidic is garnered by intellectual pursuit and understanding of Hashem, then in order to begin, we have to start with the mind being clear and free to think openly about God. In order to do that, there has to be an equilibrium to my human state of being. If I'm too overly, God forbid, angry or not sensing anything at all, then I won't be able to use the mind to begin with. Right? We remember from earlier chapters that for the Rambam, building moral character on the emotional level is so that on top of that, we can build the intellectual pursuit. But then where do we go from there? Chassidus says, okay, you've built this perfect state of equilibrium, and now you can use your mind to pursue the knowledge of God. And now where are you going to go with that? It's going to come back to the passion and the emotion. So in a sense, then, even though I don't know that this is what the Rambam had in mind, but we can look at it and say that this middle ground person, this static equilibrium of perfect balance between no extremes, is almost the prerequisite to be able to begin that which Chassidus tells us to do, which is understand godliness, and then bring that understanding into passion, even if it's not going to be static. And that's perhaps a way we can view these chapters in context of what we know from Chassidus today, as this is like a forerunner. And that before one begins the journey of Chassidus, the journey of understanding God to the point that it garners passion, one first needs to make sure that his own house is in order. His human condition isn't on the extremes where he can't even begin to start thinking about godliness. So if my human condition is such that it's an equilibrium, I'm not too extreme in my anger, and I'm not too generous, and I'm not too stingy. I'm down the middle. Now I've got my human state of being in order. Now I can start to evolve to an even higher state of being, where it's not just a human being as a good human being, but a godly human being. And when we get into the realm of the godly, then there is certainly room for extreme passions, extreme joy sometimes, and sometimes extreme self-effacement if that's what's required. Extreme love, sometimes fear, and in that connection to the godly, not just the human condition of being a good human being, but going beyond that and connecting to the godly, there is ups and downs. It's not so equilibrium and straightforward. So we'll do one more paragraph here before we get to next week, when we discuss the Rambam's solution for someone who feels like he's on one of the two extremes. And here he makes forewarns us against misunderstanding the proper character and understanding why he's of the view that the middle ground is the proper way to go. And he says, many times, people make mistakes about these behaviors. And think, they'll think of one of the extremes as good and virtuous in terms of acquiring good character traits of the soul. Some people might think of the first extreme as good. For example, someone might think that someone who is reckless and happy to take all kinds of risks, some people make the mistake of thinking that that's a virtue. And they will refer to others who put themselves in danger as, courageous, strong people. And when they see someone who is at the extreme of giving himself to every danger and every whim and every thrill, and there are people who put themselves in positions where they're close to dying on purpose, they do this. Today there's a culture like that people like to watch other people take extreme risks to the body, and they get entertainment out of it, and they look at the other person and say, wow, look at the strength he has. And the Rambam writes, and it's possible these people will survive. And Yishabchu, and people will praise these people, and say, oh, look at that strong guy. He's willing to put himself on the edge of death. That's one extreme. On the other extreme, people will think of the other extreme, that it's also good. But Yomim will say, that someone who is of a lowly state, doesn't take any risks, just kind of mellow, shusavlan, and they'll think that he's being prudent and they'll think he's being patient, when in reality he's not being patient, he just lacks sensation. And some will look at those who are lazy, that is happy with his lot. And they'll look at someone who lacks all desire for pleasure, and they'll say, and they'll say, oh, look at him, he is prudent, he fears sin. This is something similar to that the Alter Rebbe writes in chapter 15 of Tanya, describing what I like to term the technical Beinoni. Right? The Beinoni in Tanya is someone who has the inclination to do negative things, but controls himself. And the Alter Rebbe identifies somebody who, just by birth, doesn't care for pleasures. And this, says the Alter Rebbe, that's not the true Beinoni. He's technically a Beinoni because he's not doing any sin. But the real Beinoni is someone who struggles to control himself. And it's kind of similar to what the Rambam is saying here, not to think that someone who is lazy and doesn't have any desire for pleasure, as if this is someone who is fear of sin. He's not fear of sin. He just doesn't have any desire or any pleasure. And along these lines, people make the mistake of someone who is overly, extravagant and just giving away. And someone who is overly good-natured of heart to the point that it's taking abuse. People think of this as good behavior. It's a complete mistake. And therefore, however, in truth, the middle ground is what should be praised. And unto this is what a person should strive. And a person should weigh his actions to the point that he finds that middle ground where he's not too extreme in overgiving or too much of that character and not too little of that character. But again, as I mentioned before, it would seem to me that all of this is the beginning of becoming a healthy human being. And then from there, one can go into the Tanya, one can go into Chassidus, and not just be a healthy human being, but be a godly human being. And the godly human being certainly includes passions and drive and moves that are sometimes not just the straight equilibrium, the unchanging, static person. God willing, next week, we get to the Rambam solutions for someone who finds himself on one extreme or the other.
Beautiful. Yashir Koach, Rabbi. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.